This episode is brought to you by RAYCON. You never know where life is going to take you, but RAYCON's everyday earbuds offer premium audio that goes wherever you go. And their latest model is better than ever with a 32-hour battery life, active noise cancellation, and multi-point connectivity to pair with 2 devices at once. RAYCONs bring you top-tier audio quality at just half the price of other premium brands. And they even offer a 30-day happiness guarantee. No questions asked. Get 20% off RAYCON's everyday earbuds at buyraycon.com/command.
Greetings, humans. You have entered the Command Zone, your destination for all aspects of Elder Dragon Highlander. Enjoy your stay.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Command Zone podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Weeks.
I'm Jimmy Wong.
And we're talking about cards.
Cutting them specifically from your deck, trimming a list down to 100. How do you squeeze it all in for that summer bod?
I mean, like, whether you just found a new card and you're like, I have to find a spot for this, or your buddy showed you one that you have to get into your deck, or you've built a deck and you look at the deck list and suddenly there's 160 cards in it.
Yeah.
Cutting cards is really, really hard.
Yeah,
and everybody has to do it.
Everyone has to do it. Sorry, you cannot play a 160-card deck. Before we get into it, let's talk about our sponsors, cardkingdom.com/command, because when you're buying your cards, you don't want to necessarily buy 300 cards and then cut it down to 100. Why not just buy the exact perfect deck list and get it sent all to you in one convenient package? Thanks to Card Kingdom's amazing service and massive inventory, you can get the cards you want, the quality you want, and of course, shipped to you in one package, like I said before. And cardkingdom.com/command being the sponsor of this show means that when you use this affiliate link, you're also supporting content like ours. So you get more episodes of Game Nights, you get more episodes of Extra Turns, more podcast episodes, more brilliance from Rachel Weeks, talking about the Commander deck building template and so many other things. We're doing a lot of stuff focusing on around how to make the perfect deck and how to really build in a way that is optimized so that when you go to cardkingdom.com/command, you're going to be able to know what you want to get and get it all right then and there. So yeah, cardkingdom.com/command. Just type that URL in and you're already shopping for the magic cards you're going to get anyways.
And once those cards are in your hand, you're going to need to protect them, keep them safe. Go to ultrapro.com/command for all of the playmats, deck boxes, binders, card sorters, dice.
Sleeves that are not in 200 count. They come in 100 count or 105 with the Apex. They're kind of cool.
Absolutely. Getting all of your accessories from Ultra Pro is how we keep our collection organized. It's how we store our decks, how we keep them safe, how we keep them looking cool. They've got the officially licensed art from Magic the Gathering. So if you have a set you really like, maybe you're into Ether Drift, maybe you're really excited for the new sets coming out this year, Final Fantasy. All of the accessories that match the stuff that you're excited about.
Yeah, I'm actually wearing a cool Ether Drift t-shirt from Ultra Pro. They do t-shirts as well. You can find all of that in the affiliate link below.
I love these cards.
Yeah,
I think they're so cool.
These arts are incredible. And yeah, Ultra Pro gets the official Magic license, so they're able to print this stuff on merchandise. These shirts, we see them all the time around the office now. And we were able to give away a bunch of them as well during our last Game Nights Live. So yeah, make sure you check out Ultra Pro. It's not just game accessories. They also have clothing.
They do.
Very cool.
And you can shop there while supporting the show at ultrapro.com/command.
And the last way to support the show is directly at patreon.com/command zone. We made it a little harder. You have to type in 4 extra letters this time around. But you get to access our Patreon with tons of cool perks for our patrons. At the lowest tier, you get access to our Discord. You get to chat with Rachel, myself, Josh, and other people and join our amazing community there. You also get access to Game Nights and Extra Turns a day early, ad-free. I don't know why you'd ever want to watch without those amazing ads. But in case you wanted a more pure, uninterrupted experience, you get to get that before everyone else. You get to watch these amazing episodes and know what happens. And that's valuable.
Yeah. You get access to exclusive content like Turn Talk.
Yeah, that's right, at higher tiers. So make sure you check out all the tiers that we have available. We met a couple of our patrons at Chicago. Some of them at the Monarch tier had the exclusive team jacket. You may have seen us wearing on some of our episodes. That's only available at certain tiers. But check it out. There's something for everyone. And even at the lowest tier, there's so much cool stuff there. So patreon.com/command zone. We also shout out one lucky patron every single week or episode. And this episode is dedicated to Jake Thoreau.
Jake, you rock.
You rock. You rolled. Okay.
Now, I'd love to procrastinate talking about this topic we have today, because that's how I do it with all my decks. Every time I build a deck list, I get to like 107 cards and then sort of wander away.
107, lucky you.
I know, I get most of it down, and then it gets really hard.
I'm just excitedly typing in every single card name that I see that I find online, and I'm at like 170, 160, and I'm like, oh, well, this deck is unplayable and unbuildable now, so I quit.
And you can't even play test it because there's too many cards. And you'd have to play way more lands. Yeah, I would say that like cutting cards from your perfect list is one of the most difficult parts of deck building. But of course, it is essential to get down to that round 100 card number.
Yes.
I was writing up advice for this episode, and I kept thinking of the writing phrase, kill your darlings or murder your darlings. And it comes from this idea that like we're very precious about prose and we're very precious about ideas and characters and scenes, even if they may not necessarily serve the greater story as a whole. And it feels like that is very similar to what it feels like when you're building a deck. You're like, oh, I really like this little thing, like this interaction
if only
between
this
these
happens.
two cards.
Yeah.
And if I cut it, then that's impossible. But ultimately, it isn't actually doing what the deck wants overall and might be better served in a different list.
Yeah, and it's tough because, we always talk about building optimized, making sure you have the right number of things in your deck. And a lot of times you don't want to cut a card because it's like, I want to go against the grain. You know what? I do need to play this special. I opened this in a booster at a very special event and it needs to go in this deck or else. But honestly, a lot of times we don't talk about playing optimized and all that stuff to give you the most try-hard edge like list on the world, right? We want to just make sure that your deck works. And that when you play it, you're having the most fun possible. And so cutting your favorite cards, your pet cards, or the cards that just don't quite fit can be really difficult. But once you understand how to do it, the process gets easier and easier, and the gameplay gets more and more fun. And we'll say this later on in the episode, but nothing is ever final in Commander.
Yeah.
You can always throw in that thing that you wanted to play back in just in case it was the wrong decision in the first place. But today we are going to talk about how to cut cards from your deck.
Yeah. I mean, murder your darlings is very harsh advice, especially in like in a deck building thing where the only person it's hurting is you, right?
Yeah,
like you don't have to. You can always prioritize your darlings. You just have to recognize what the cards are and what like that you're making an exception for them, and make sure that you're not sacrificing on functionality.
Reduce your darlings.
Yeah, just
put your
slightly.
darlings back in the binder.
Yeah.
No one's getting killed.
All right, so we're going to go through a couple of different techniques you can try or things to think about when you're cutting cards from your deck, starting with the most basic thing you have to consider when you're taking a deck list from like 160 all the way down to 100. And that's just knowing what your deck does.
Yeah, oftentimes this is the most obvious just by looking at your commander. But oftentimes, too, it actually isn't quite as clear. But I would say in general, understanding what your deck does, how does it win the game, and what does it want to do in the game to get to that winning position. And it could be that this deck also doesn't want to win the game. That's not as clear. But we're going to talk about the majority cases here, which is what does your deck do? Why? How is it going to do that to get to the winning point of the game?
Right. You need to start with a very firm understanding. And if like writing a little one sentence summary of what your deck does helps you focus it, then write it down. It sounds like homework because it kind of is. But if you look at a deck and you're like, okay, so my plan is I'm going to make a lot of tokens and I'm going to sacrifice them for value.
Aristocats.
Yeah. Don't sacrifice your cats. Aristocrats.
Yeah, 1 sentence summary, a log line for you writers out there, just so you get it, right? Because when you're looking at all of your cards, you can just instantly link back to that log line and go, is this helping me achieve what I set out to do? Because if it's like, oh, no, this is just a random 6/6 and I want to put it in here because it's a dinosaur, it's like, well, that doesn't make tokens or sacrifice them. So that should be an easy, obvious cut.
Yeah, a lot of the times I think we like to put in cards that are adjacent to the strategy where you're like, oh, I'm making a lot of tokens, so I probably want like an anthem effect or something like that. And you're like, how does the anthem effect serve the log line? If you're planning on sacrificing these creatures, do they need to be bigger? So you're like, okay, maybe I'll get rid of the anthem effects because that's sort of a side plan that goes with one of the steps.
Yeah, and oftentimes I think we get tricked because a lot of times precons will have something that is more about the secondary commander and is an Anthem effect, but the primary commander is about sacrificing. And so we'll get used to the fact that like, oh, but I did win that one game that one time because all my 1/1s were 3/3s. And it's like, well, actually, just because of that single case scenario doesn't mean that this is actually what you want to be doing with your deck. And oftentimes those things can muddy our memory a little bit. So having the logline is a really easy, simple way to not be distracted by prior scenarios or inherent biases that you might have towards the actual deck. And just really seeing it from a black and white, not the colors, a clear perspective of what am I trying to do and does this card serve that or no? And so it's a binary answer. Is it yes or is it no? And as a result, that makes the initial cuts a lot easier. That I think is like, that'll take you from, let's say, 160 down to 140 really quickly and really easily. Because it's like, you know what? I just saw this. I thought of a scenario where it could be really cool, but when I actually look at it, it doesn't make any sense here.
Right. This isn't actually part of the primary plan.
Yeah.
So I think that's the best first step. You need a clear picture of your deck, and when you look at each card, you should have an idea of how that contributes to the plan.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, this card makes tokens. That's part of step 1. This is a sacrifice outlet. That's a part of step 2.
Yeah.
That you can envision each role in actually executing the plan.
Yeah, and you don't have to worry about the minutia either. It doesn't have to be like, all right, this creates tokens, but I already have 17 of these, right? At this point in the cutting, you're just looking at what's on the outside in the exterior. It's like when you're starting with a marble block. You know what you want Michelangelo to look like when it's done, but when you take that first chunk off, you can take you're just getting the edges of the rock off. You're not trying to chisel a nose onto this thing, right?
Yeah, it's like when you're drawing a figure or something, you start with mostly circles and mostly like vague shapes, which you're going to hone in later. This is getting to vague shapes.
Yeah, unless you love Minecraft, in which case you start with squares.
That's true.
Okay, that had nothing to do with what we're talking about today. All right, next up, you have identified your strategy, you have a log line, you have a one-sentence summary. Now let's sort, and not into a binder, but rather into categories. So
this is my biggest part of the deck building process is sorting, and as I add cards, I try to add them into categories so I can see what the deck is doing as I sort of add in more and more cards. It's an interesting thing because I think like a lot of people don't know how many go in each category.
Sure.
Where it's like, well, I have like 8 of these and 15 of these, but how many's too many? We go through a lot of that information in the most recent deck building template and then in the follow-up episode, which talks about exceptions to the rule.
Yes.
So we're not going to spend a ton of time on that here, but go watch the deck building template if you haven't watched that yet. That's going to help you get a rough idea for how many of each thing that you want, and then you'll know exactly where you can start shaving off.
Yeah, and when you're deck building, let's say you're doing it in paper, not online, you can sort it out and be like, wow, here's all my ramp, and it's only ramp. Here's all my removal or whatever it is. Or I guess we rename it in the template as disruption. So you can just see like, you know what? I have a lot. I have 20 pieces of ramp in this deck. And you can go, okay, well, this one's cute. This one actually doesn't match the plan. This one contributes. And so you just get an instant idea of like, okay, now that I've laid it all out, it looks like I can actually make some easier cuts here too. I think actually something I should mention is when you're cutting stuff, you want to do the easy cuts first and the hard cuts last, because that's what naturally is going to happen. So if you lay it out in terms of your categories and you can just instantly tell that you have way too many of one thing, then that makes the cutting process much, much more simple. If it's instantly like every single cut is like I'm sweating over it and I'm feeling bad or I'm feeling, I don't want to do it, you're never going to finish the process. So this is we're identifying the steps in an order that helps you understand how is it easy to make the easiest cuts first and then get to the more difficult ones.
I would also say, like, if you're going to build with categories and you know that's something that you're going to build with, start with a number for each category before you even start building. Because then you know exactly how much of each thing you have, where you need to fill in, where you need to cut, before you're being precious about like the individual cards themselves.
Yeah.
Like Aristocrats is interesting because you can start with the deck building template. And be like, okay, so I want this much of this and this much of that, but I know that I want at least like 10 sacrifice outlets.
Right.
I know I want at least like 15 cards that make some kind of like sacrifice fodder. Then once you have all the cards in front of you, you're like, oh, I'm below my goal here and I'm above my goal here. This is like a clear spot where I can start shaving some cards down.
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. Is it easier to add up to a certain number of, let's say, ramp, or is it easier to cut down to that number?
It's definitely easier to add up, but I think, especially when you're newer to deck building and you're excited, you're just dumping a bunch of cards in, and that's not like that's how I build. When I have a commander I'm excited about, I'm like, okay, here are the top 4 cards I want to play with. Also a Soul Ring.
Can't forget Command Tower.
Exactly.
There, and all of a sudden your brain's
it's just
in 30 places.
Random.
Yeah.
So asking that of people, I think, is like unrealistic, but I like the idea of just being like, okay, setting rough goals before you start dumping things in there. That way you're not like using your feelings about each individual card to sort of determine how many are in each category. Yeah,
that's interesting. I think just, again, we're combining different strategies here will make the end result, because humans are hardwired to avoid pain. And one of the most painful things about deck building is cutting. One of the most joyous things about deck building is adding.
Right.
So helping you limit the adding part of it so that you don't have to cut so hard later on definitely seems like a sound strategy. And watch the deck building template. It's incredible.
Thank you.
Okay.
Up next, it's another episode you should watch. It's about playtesting. Go to ARCHIDEKT if you haven't built your deck in paper yet. If you're trying to find a cut when you have the physical deck, then you can do it in person. But playtest your deck and try and read the signals that your deck is giving you as you're playing.
Yeah.
Do you not have enough lands? You're like, I'm always drawing like 1 or 2 enhancers that don't really do anything, and I'm low on ways to actually feed those enhancers.
Right.
Like, you start to find where your deck is frustrating you. And then you can start adjusting things when you cut.
Yeah.
Cards that get stuck in your hand, they just don't fit in your curve. Those are great things to cut.
Or just you see it in your hand and you're playing out your game and you go, I've never found a moment to actually play this card because I'm maybe not that excited about it, or it doesn't contribute in the way that I want. I was actually saying too that if you are just putting together a list and you haven't figured out the mana base and all that stuff too, you can play test in a way that you imagine that you hit your land drop every turn.
Right.
So instead of a starting hand of 7, you just draw 4. And you say, all right, turn 1, I draw a card, I play a land. It doesn't have to be anything. But now you're playing in a way that doesn't force you to, like, if you have a 150 card deck, be like, all right, how many lands do I need to put in this to make this a correct playtesting environment? You're just focusing primarily on, if I hit my land drop every turn, is this playing out the way that I want, or are these cards, like you said, dead in my hand, I never want to play them, or they don't fit into my curve, or like, oh wow, I didn't realize because my commander comes out always on this turn that this slot doesn't need to be as filled. So that's just a way to avoid the extra brain damage you're going to take from having to figure out what the new ratio of lands is for your 170 card deck.
Yeah, because like sometimes you build a deck and you're like, okay, I'll put in like everything that deals damage that's 2 mana and like 3 mana, because those will come down before my commander, and that helps, right? And then you start playtesting and you're like, oh, like 3 mana is actually way better in this list because I want to play a mana rock on turn 2 to set up my commander, and then I have a nice little window to cast the 3 mana one that feels more efficient. So, and you're not going to learn that until you start actually playing with the cards, and then you can scrap all of the 2 mana ones and fill in all the 3 mana ones.
Yeah.
So you learn a lot from just playtesting. If you haven't watched the goldfishing episodes, it's do this one thing to win more games, how to playtest. That's Command Zone 596. Check that one out.
Yeah, and it's good to also have in these playtest scenarios, like, where am I going to be playing this deck? Am I bringing this to a MagicCon, or is this just for my regular play group? In which case you can go, I always need Nature's Claim. Right. Or actually, you know what? Board wipes aren't that necessary because everyone's playing Spellslinger decks. And so that way you can also get a better feel of like, hey, I know that the deck building template that I just watched said to have 4 to 5 of these types of mass disruption. But actually, in my play group, I can take that number down a little bit. So that's an easy cut for me. I'm going to get rid of the clunkiest board wipe I have in here. Or, you know what? I'm only going to keep the one that has Spree on it because it's the most flexible, or whatever it is. So considering your play group always works. But yeah, watch the goldfishing video. I think goldfishing is just by far the one thing you can do to win more games, as is the title of the video.
I know. It's the thing. It gets it like focuses your attention on how your deck works.
Yeah.
Because when you're playing with your buddies, you're like hanging out and you're eating and you're chatting and you can get frustrated but not be able to like specifically pinpoint why. When you're just playing your deck by yourself, you're like, oh, I recognize that something is happening. I recognize that I'm running out of cards.
Yeah.
And that's where my frustration is coming from. It's not as muddled by like the larger environment.
Yeah, it's interesting. In the deck building template episode, you guys talk about how important card draw is. And I think it's really easy to forget whether or not your deck needs it when you don't playtest it. So many times I playtested the deck and went like, wow, I played 7 hands now, and every single time I've run out of cards by turn 4.
Yep.
And it goes, oh, I just need to jam in more card draw. And what were the clunky things that sat in my hand that didn't do anything, but actually needed more cards in hand? It's like, okay, now I get where I can sort of make some room here, get rid of this over there.
Yeah, sometimes that can mean that like your curve is too low and your cards aren't substantial enough. You're like, oh, I would have killed to play like a 5-drop there, but I just kept drawing like all of my setup pieces.
Yeah.
So just recognizing what you want, like all right, the next card I'm going to draw, what would I love for that card to be?
Yeah.
Is a great question to ask yourself while you're playtesting.
A land. Okay. I like this next one quite a bit. This topic is separate your essentials. So when you're playtesting, if there's a card because when you playtest a bunch, you get to see more of your deck. And if there's a card that's like, wow, I'm so happy when I see Esper Sentinel or whatever, then that is what we would call an essential, a card you would never, ever, ever cut.
Mm-hmm. I found, especially when I'm cutting in paper, like I do this most often when I have a deck and I have like 1 or 2 more cards that I want to squeeze into the list. I just start separating cards and I'm like, okay, I can't cut any of my ramp. I can't cut any of my card draw. This is the best card in the deck. And then you're left with like 10 to 12 cards that are like, these are sort of my options for what could come out of the list. Mm-hmm. And then you get to do more 1-for-1 comparisons. You're like, okay, it's closest to these in the curve. It's closest to these in functionality. And it really sort of focuses your attention on what the cards are that you could possibly spare. Because sometimes you're looking at a deck list with 102 cards.
Oh, man, that's
you can't focus at all because there's all of the cards in the world and you have to read through them individually. So like on ARCHIDEKT, they have little like color flags. If you change all of your whole deck to like the red flag or something like that, and then slowly change the ones that you would never cut to back to the default,
it becomes
setting,
much obvious.
Then you're like, okay, now I know which cards I could possibly be cutting for these.
Yeah. And you can compare them much better as well. You can go, all right, this is actually a ramp and removal piece on the same thing. Well, that seems more essential than this one thing that's very specific and requires a scenario to happen. Like, I get it now. I want the more flexible piece. This is easier for me to hold on to and say, this is closer to essential than non-essential.
Yeah, I remember that when you're using this method, that until proven otherwise, your lands, your disruption, your ramp, the stuff that makes your deck run your vegetables,
your card draw,
are essentials.
Yeah.
So if you're not adding in card draw, and then you can look at your card draw pieces and see if you want to replace one of those. If you're adding in a plan piece, make sure that you're not cutting a vegetable for a card that may not necessarily make sure your deck runs.
Yeah, this is actually interesting because the real life comparison I have for this is during the LA fires, we went further down south just to get out of the air quality. Our house wasn't in danger or anything. And we just brought like a suitcase each with us with the plan of being like, all right, we may be gone for like a week or so. And then after that week was over, I realized, wow, these are my essentials that I brought with me.
Yeah.
I literally did not need anything else in my closet.
Yeah.
And when I went back and looked at my closet, I went, oh, if I want to cut these now, it makes it so much easier for me to be like, let's donate these 5 hoodies I never, ever wear to Goodwill because I know they're not essential. And that I had 1 or 2 jacket/outerwear that I literally could wear as many times as I wanted. And I knew it had everything. It had the pockets I needed. It was a zip up. It had a hood or whatever else. And so I realized, oh, I don't actually need that crew whatever sweater without a hood because I need a hood for my whatever, right? It just made it much more obvious that once I was able to separate the things that I absolutely needed and I knew I would need, like the underwear and the socks, the veggies in this case, of the things I didn't need outside of that.
I love underwear and socks or veggies.
They're your
totally
veggies.
Are.
You need them.
They totally are.
Unless you're my brother who never wears socks ever.
wild. In Los Angeles?
Well, that's
Sounds
why.
so sweaty.
Yeah.
Does he wear sandals a lot?
He's a flip-flop kind of guy.
I see. I just like the idea of like adjusting your perspective on your decks. And it also, like, if you look at a card and you're like, well, this, like, I'm always happy when Impact Tremors is in my hand. Then you're like, maybe I should put more Impact Tremors in my deck.
Right.
Like, if this isn't essential and I'm only playing that one effect, maybe I replace some of these effects and make sure I have more Impact Tremors.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Or at least some amount of small redundancy, because you realize just how powerful it is.
I do want to mention that there's some cards in lists that are not mechanical essentials. Maybe you put it in there because you love the card, or the card was a gift, or like it was the reason that you built the deck in the first place.
You won the
that
draft.
That can be an
whatever.
essential.
Yeah.
Like I have Psionic Blast in my Feldergriff deck. It's not that good in the deck. It's a 3-mana sorcery that deals 4 damage to any target and 2 damage to me. That's not a great spell.
Why is it in there?
Because I have a beta version that AD gave to me, and it's signed, and it's just one of those cards that like Octavia can support it. So like that's never getting cut from the list. Obviously, it's not the best one in slot, but it's an essential for me.
Yeah. Yeah, just clarifying that, right? Really, because a lot of times people listen to these episodes and just think, oh, you are all being such tryhards. All you're doing is just making this game less fun because you can't play the cards that you love. It's like, that's not the case. If it's an essential for you, then you can find a way in your list, and this is just helping you understand what other areas can get trimmed down so that you can play those cards.
That
those
counts.
crappy cards of yours that were not found on the internet in a top 10 list.
All right. So those are the first techniques that we're going to talk about. We have a lot of other reasons that you could cut cards for mechanical or otherwise that we're going to go through after a few words from our sponsors.
Oh, hey everyone, it's me, everyone's favorite inescapable magic mascot, Loot the Pathfinder. I don't need help finding my path through the multiverse, but when it comes to selling my sweet loot-themed loot, well, that path was paved by Shopify. As you might ancestral recall, I've talked to you about Shopify before, but the more sets I'm in, the more people demand cute, cuddleable me's, so my warehouses are flush with plush. Luckily, with Shopify's powerful tools, I'm making sales even quicker than a lightning bolt. They have the #1 checkout on the planet, making sure your shoppers' carts don't get abandoned. Like how I was abandoned in a vault for millennia. Shopify is the business behind the business, powering all sorts of sellers, even the Command Zone merch store. So if you want to boost your sales with Shopify, do it now. An opportunity like this doesn't double strike. I mean strike twice. Haha, silly little Lou.
Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/TCZ, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/TCZ to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/TCZ.
Hi there, I'm Redshift. You know, there's nothing more important than love. And I love going fast! That's why nothing gets my heart racing like my RAYCON wireless earbuds! I don't have time to take an hour-long pit stop for dead batteries when I'm zipping through my favorite podcast at triple speed! But with RAYCON's quick charge function, 10 minutes gets me an hour and a half of juice! That's the kind of fast I'm looking for! Plus, their latest model is better than ever! They got 32 hours of battery life, multi-point connectivity, and all sorts of sweet activated abilities! Heck, these earbuds even come with active noise cancellation, which is great when you've got to block out engine noise! Vroom, vroom! And just like me, Raycons are efficiently costed, starting at just half the price of other premium brands. With a price like that, I knew I had to snap up a pair quick, especially since they came in my favorite color, yellow! What, you thought I was gonna say red? Joke's on you, I'm a complex person!
Go to buyraycon.com/command where you'll get 20% off everyday earbuds. That's right, Raycon is offering 20% off when you go to buyraycon.com/command. That's buyraycon.com/command.
Sorry I'm late. I had to re-sleeve. Oh, your decks are looking cool.
Oh yeah, I've been loving this new Mana 8 line from the Ultra Pro. These Apex sleeves are literally the best shuffle feel I've ever had. And it keeps my cards safe while repping my favorite color, red.
I'll do you one better. I'm showing my devotion to my favorite color, white, with the Alcove Edge deck box.
Ooh.
It's got the symbol on the front and also a cool stylized interior pattern.
Nice. But I think I got you both beat. I've got the Apex sleeves, the Alcove deck box, the padded binder, and this sleek stitch playmat, all in my favorite color.
Josh, that's green.
You play blue?
But with this setup, they won't know that ahead of time. They'll see this big, bold tree, and they'll think Josh has turned over a new leaf.
Yeah, you're not fooling anyone.
People will know. Everybody knows you play blue.
No, they don't.
Hey Murph! Yeah? What color is Josh playing?
Blue.
See?
Yeah, but he didn't even see all my stuff.
Keep your cards safe and stylish with the Mana 8 accessory line from Ultra Pro.
Choose from 6 stunning designs that let you show off or disguise your favorite colors in Magic, all while keeping your collection secure and protected. Go to ultrapro.com/command to get your hands on their premium Apex sleeves, along with deck boxes, playmats, binders, and more.
Support the show and rep your colors with Mana 8 at ultrapro.com/command.
Aha, Psych Rift. Yeah, this deck feels like a 3.
Updating your decks?
No, I'm just sorting them into commander brackets.
Oh, just use ARCHIDEKT. It's the easiest way to get an estimate of your deck's bracket. Plus, you can click the number and it'll lay out the reasoning. It takes things like tutors, extra turns, and land destruction into account, and game changers are all clearly marked. It even recognizes 2-card combos. See? It's saying your deck is actually a 4. It'll be a 3 if you've got Ristic Study.
Huh. Okay, 4 it is.
ARCHIDEKT is the best place to browse, brew, and check your deck's commander brackets. Just go to archidekt.com/command zone to get started.
That's ARCHIDEKT.com/command zone.
All right, we are back talking about how to trim cards from your deck list to get down to that perfect 100, or I guess 99, or sometimes 98, or sometimes 97, depending on what your commander breakdown is.
3 commanders in the command zone?
Yeah, you know, there's, yeah.
It's coming up next.
Can you do a background? No, you can't. You can
No.
only do 2. Okay. Companion? No, that's an extra card. All right, let's talk about do-nothings. This is my favorite kind of card to add to a deck. I'm very good at doing this.
So I have found that these are the cards that I cut the most often. They're usually enhancers or they're payoffs. There's some kind of card that doesn't do anything unless you're already set up.
Yeah, they're the final piece of the engine, the combo piece or whatever. But if you have just this in your hand, it looks real stinky.
It doesn't do anything in multiple phases of the game. And we need these in Commander to win the game.
Yeah.
Right? Like some amount of enhancers is how you do 120 damage. That's how you kill 3 players.
They do nothing until they do everything.
Right. So having some amount of these is correct, but having too many of them means your deck is also a do nothing. You can only support so many of these cards that say like, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you make a dragon.
Right.
Or whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, exile it, and then next turn you do even more.
Oftentimes these are like 5 mana and up cards as well, because they're trying to position themselves for the part of the game where you have the rest of the pieces ready and set up.
Yeah, these are often like win more style of cards, or you're winning your plans online. Here's how you actually win.
Yeah.
But win more is sort of a term that's used for if your deck is doing its thing, it helps you do its thing even better.
1,000-Year Storm.
Yeah. So, and they're cool and fun, but if your deck isn't doing its thing yet, they're not going to help you get there. So you only want like, I don't know, 2 or 3, maybe.
Yeah.
Like up to 5 in certain archetypes, especially if your commander is one of these things, like even lower. Because when you draw them, you're like, all right, I have 5 enchantments. If I draw a brainstorm, it's gonna be so good.
So good, yeah.
But I don't have one. I have all these 5-mana enchantments.
Or you just draw another one of your win more cards. It's
Right.
it's an easy way to think about it is like, if you drew this at a part of the game where you'd much rather have just even a divination, then you probably should think about potentially cutting this, especially if you have too many of them, and that's why you're drawing them in surplus.
Yeah, these are like token doublers or counter doublers, even like overrun style effects. We talked about paths for instants and sorceries. That's the one I think of because those are the coolest, so people keep putting more in their deck. They're just really sweet and hardest to cut, but I think a way to think about it is like, if you're running 1,000-Year Storm and it's been sweet and that's the card that's been your payoff, but you've had it in the deck for like 3 years, maybe you take that out and put in the dragon one that makes 4/4s when you cast it. There's only so many slots that you can actually dedicate there, so you can rotate them. If you're like, I'm interested to try this new one, but it means I'm gonna have to take out a card that I'm really fond of.
Yeah, it's like me swapping out Crater Hoof Behemoth for the Ibex or any other effect that has kind of an overrun ability. I could also just swap it out for overrun, right?
Yeah.
I also think that's really important to not have too many of these do-nothings in your deck, because if you have too many of them, this also can lead to just giant, massive blowouts where you spend 7 mana on the card that's your Nyx Bloom Ancient, but you can't use it till your next turn, and then someone just removes it.
Yeah.
And it goes, great, you spent all this time preparing, and then when you're finally ready to do the thing, you weren't able to capitalize on it because it's too clunky, or it sits at the top of your curve in a way that doesn't actually let you utilize it immediately. So I think like it's easy to think like, if I play this and it gets removed on the spot, do I just lose? Or does my entire thing fall apart? And if you're playing too many of those, then you're just opening yourself up to having really miserable play experiences sometimes.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at your deck list and you're not really sure what your do-nothing spells are, evaluate their floor and their ceiling, which are terms that we use to say the floor is like, if this card performed its worst, what does that look like?
Doubling Season on an empty board with no mana.
You have no blockers. You have no. It does nothing.
You can't even make a single token. Your board is empty. You just play Doubling Season.
Right. But the ceiling on Doubling Season is very high, where it's like, oh, I play a Hydra and it's twice as big and I have 2 copies or something like that.
Yeah.
That's a very high ceiling. So you need to make sure that the ceiling justifies the floor. And if the floor is nothing, then you can't have too many of those actual spells.
Yeah, right? You just have to think about the percentage of like, what percentage of time am I drawing this over just, like I said earlier, would you much just rather have a draw spell instead?
Yep. All right. To help you sort of evaluate cards a little bit clearer, we're going to refresh your memory on Quadrant theory.
Quadrant theory, yeah. First dubbed by limited resources, which is the reason that this whole podcast was started in the first place, was after listening to them, we thought, what if we did this, but for Commander? It's a way that you can help evaluate cards in a limited environment, but it also is very useful just across Magic in general. So Quadrant theory asks what a card is good at, if they're good, across 4 different stages. So the first stage is development stage. This makes cards like Soul Ring very good. Rampant Growth, cards that accelerate your mana, or cards that get you ahead, very efficient early cards like what's that thing called? Deathrite Shaman.
Sure.
Great in the development stage. And then the next quadrant to look at is this card good when you are ahead? So this is a thing that I think people are a lot of mistakes get made in this area because people only think about like, oh, I want to play this card. I'm already winning. And then I want to play this. Like typically I think being ahead and asking yourself, do I still want a card like this, is a really good time to understand if it's actually worth it in your deck.
If it is only good when you're ahead, it is likely not worth a slot, or it's not worth many slots.
Yeah, how often are you actually genuinely ahead in a game of Commander?
Right.
And how long can you sustain that? So do you want cards that are only good in the situation where you're in probably the least amount of time, whereas you're always going to be in the development stage in the beginning of a game, and then the next category is parity, which is how good is this in a board state that's stalled out? So, for instance, a board wipe is great in parity and great when you're behind, or a card that gains you incremental value is really good when you're at parity, because when no one else is doing something but you're slowly gaining value, then that's amazing for you.
Right. Parity is also like, if you draw a Crater Hoof, that's great when you're at parity because it's a parity breaker. If you have like card advantage, is great at parity because now you're ahead on cards. I think you're most often at parity in Commander. For me, this is the section that needs to be sort of the sturdiest for Commander, because you want to be successful when you're on par with your opponents.
Yeah, it's either this or the final section or a quadrant, which is behind.
Right.
Again, when you're a 4-player game, chances are you're not going to be in the lead, or you're going to be in parity or behind. So cards that are really good when you're behind are going to honestly be good across the entire game. And same goes for parity. Like, that's why board wipes are so good. When you're really, really far behind, a board wipe can instantly equalize the board in a way that very few other cards can. And honestly, you want to have cards that are good across multiple stages.
Right.
So Deathrite Shaman is another example of that. Our new favorite, Psychic Frog, is a card that is good in every single stage of the game, pretty much. And when you look at your cards now, you're saying, I have 5 cards I need to cut. Well, this one's only good when I'm ahead, whereas this card's good in 2 of the 4 quadrants. This card's good in every single quadrant. It makes it very obvious to go like, all right, the card that is the win more when I'm ahead card is the one that easily can get knocked off that list.
And remember, you do need like some amount of cards that are best in the development stage. But like we talked about in the new deck building template, we've cut back on a lot of those like early ramp spells that don't do anything for you in the late game to make space for lands that are sort of always good in the game.
Yeah.
All right.
That's why MDFCs are also amazing.
Right. Because they're better at so many spots.
Yeah. Balligate Recovery. Great in the development stage. It's a land drop. Great when you're at parity. Gets you something that might break parity. Great when you're behind. Gets you that piece that got removed. Even great when you're ahead. Press the advantage, right? So that's why those sorts of cards, the modal stuff that we see more and more of. The reason I think Wizards is printing them is to give players more flexibility and just more chances to get back into the game. Again, generally you're at parity or you're behind.
All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is curve, your mana curve. You can lay this out on paper. In paper, if you've got your deck in front of you, you can make stacks of your 0 drops, your 1 drops, your 2 drops, your 3 drops, 4 drops, and take a look at where you have a lot of them. You're like, I have a lot of 4s and my commander's a 4. That's probably a conflict.
Yeah.
Or it's like, you know what? I actually don't have that many 2 drops that are good in the early
game.
Yeah. A good way that I've seen to talk about curve is when you're laying stuff out in paper in front of you, you do like, okay, here's my 2 drops that I would actually want to cast on turn 2.
Oh, right.
And then here's my 2 drops that are like good at any point in the game. Or like then your X spells are not necessary, your 2 drops. And you can lay it out and get a more clear vision of like your proactive curve.
Yeah, so you're going to put your rampant growth and stuff in there, whereas your, impact tremors might go later on in the game when you're trying to slam that and the thing at the same time. This is, for me, the first place I go to, actually, when I start cutting cards, is I just look at the curve and I go, I ignore the first part of it and I just look at the 6, 7s, 8s, and 9s and go, okay, I have 8 of each of these in each category. Instantly, I know that I can get rid of some of the clunk there because you're just never going to be able to play all of those cards in the game, and drawing them early is really, really bad. I think what a lot of people may not recognize is that when you draw an opening hand of like 7 cards and 2 of them are 8 drops, you've essentially mulliganed to 5. Because you may never even get to the point where you can cast those cards. So if you have way too many of those, that to me is the easiest place to start. It's just which of my 6+ drops are clunky and I don't want to actually have multiples of, and then you can just start from that end, and then you can sort of shift your attention back to the rest of your deck.
Yeah. And remember to include like X spells and that kind of stuff in your big late game spells.
Yeah. Generally place them where you would love to cast them the most. Because if X is equal to 4 is your ideal state, then that's a 6 drop or a 5 drop, depending on what it is.
Right. I think that's something that Commander players don't think about that often, is like the curve of your first few turns is going to be consistent, and you should try and design your deck to be consistent in the first 5 turns. Like you should have a rough idea of like what I want to be doing on turn 2, what I want to be doing on turn 3, what I want to be doing on turn 4, often casting my commander, or on turn 3 you're casting your commander. And then how do I go from I have my commander on the board, I'm set up to winning this game?
Yeah, because most other players are doing a similar thing. We found that like turns 1 to 3 are just set up, getting things ready, and then really the punches start happening. The heat gets hotter turn 4, 5, and 6, and then the game starts ending 7, 8, 9.
Right. So keep an eye on your curve. You know that you're only going to cast, 1 7 drop, 1 6 drop in a game, unless your deck is explicitly designed to cast really expensive spells. So you can't be running that many.
Yeah.
And if your commander is a 4 drop where you're like, I know I want to cast my commander on turn 3, then you probably don't need as many 4 drops in your deck because it's going to be fighting with that piece.
Yeah.
Like if you have a Guardian project that you're like, okay, I need to set up my card draw engine, but I also want to get my commander down. What do I do right now? Is that maybe there's a better card draw engine for you where you're like, oh, it's better for me to have a Shamanic Revelation that I can cast after my commander's down and I can draw some cards to fill back up.
Or a Garrick's Uprising, because I have so many 4-power plus creatures in my deck.
Because it's cheaper and it comes down a turn earlier than my commander. All of those like give you good ways to look at like what is weird in your list and what is kind of buzzing with your plan, even if it's in a small sort of insignificant way.
Yeah, and I like to also separate creatures from non-creatures when I do this to go, I'm a creature-based deck, but I have only 3-drop artifacts or 3-drop non-creature spells. And to go, okay, maybe I'm actually overloaded on the non-creature part of my deck and I need more on the creature side or whatever it is. Also, if you're like, my deck always needs to get to 4 mana and stay around 4 or 5, then you don't want to actually put too many 5-drops or 4-drops in your deck if you want to be casting multiple spells a turn. If your deck is always trying to get to 5, then you can have a good mix of 2s and 3s. That way you can double spell in a turn and get the most out of your mana. And that way you're also basically checking sort of like what your efficiency is so that you can have the best board state at the soonest point in time.
Yeah, we talk a lot about the mana curve of my decks in the deck building template episode. If you want to use that as a template, you're welcome to. It's an average of my decks. It's not close to any one of them in particular. So you can use it as guidelines if you'd like. But your curve may look very different from mine.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk overlap.
This is the best. This is my favorite thing about modern card design is the amount of cards that fill 2 slots
Sometimes
in a
3.
commander deck. Sometimes 3.
Sometimes they're the whole thing, just the card itself.
I think we think about cutting cards as like, I replace this one card with this one card.
Yeah.
But replacing 2 cards with one card that fills both roles
So nice.
sort of cuts a card from your list. It compresses 2 cards down into one slot. And I think when you look at the deck building template and you see that there's 108 cards that we specify, it's because overlap is so powerful. You can easily have 8 cards that fill multiple slots. And honestly, that's very conservative.
Yeah.
You can run like modal spells that draw and are targeted interaction.
Yeah, Mystic Confluence type stuff.
Yeah.
Target interaction, card draw, or disruption. It's got it all packaged into one thing, and you get to choose. In every single game, it might be a little different.
I mean, you have modal spells that are both lands and recursion, like Bala Ged Recovery,
So
or
good.
lands and interaction, like Sink into Stupor. Those both take up one slot. They represent 2 numbers, but they take up 1 slot in your deck.
Yeah, there's spree cards from OTJ. Basically, the different forms of kicker that now exist are all different ways for you to have multiple options for a card. And so that even, let's say that you have 3 steps ahead. There's a counterspell on there and there's some other stuff. And you go, well, this is not as good as just a straight counterspell and it's not as good as whatever else, but are you willing to sacrifice a tiny bit of value in terms of quality for one card or have to fit 2 cards into one slot or even sometimes 3 cards into one slot?
Yeah.
So I think almost always you're okay losing a tiny bit of value just so that you can have more space for more fun stuff.
Yeah, I mean, modality is the name of the game in Commander because you never know what you're going to play against.
Yeah.
That's why board wipes like Austere Command or Farewell are so popular because they can answer anything and everything in a very significant way. And if you can take advantage of that modality, then it's like you have twice as many cards in your hand because all of your cards can do 2 things.
Yeah.
Like Collective Resistance can either destroy an artifact, an enchantment, or it can make one creature hexproof and indestructible.
So good in
That's
the deck.
great.
Yeah, if your deck cares about keeping your commander alive instead of just playing one heroic intervention, you can just have this instead. And you get all these other modes on top of it. So many times the cards that are like, oh, I just can't wait for someone to try and remove my commander. Never happened. But I did need to get rid of that artifact real bad. This card fills all of those slots, is cheap to cast, so good, and can do multiple too.
Yeah, there's also more and more cards that just represent multiple slots, right? Like one I think about all the time is Forensic Gadgeteer.
Yes.
Reduces the cost of your activations of artifacts, and whenever you cast an artifact, it gives you clues.
Right.
So it's a draw engine that also saves you on mana. You have to be able to like actively use that cost reduction, but that's 2 very strong slots on one card.
Yeah, it reminds me of sort of the original, what I feel like started to kick off this design spot, which is
Deathrite Shaman.
No, that card is just busted. The 2 in the green one that is investigating for lands that are coming in, landfall.
Sure.
How am I forgetting this? I had it in my mind just
Tireless Tracker.
Tireless Tracker. Yeah, that to me felt like Wizards was like, hey, now let's start messing with this design space. And from that point onwards, every set now, even the commons are stacked with multiple abilities that all sort of contribute towards each other and can just find the perfect spot in your deck now. I love it.
So if you're like really hemming and hawing over a cut, and you're like, I'm not allowed to touch my vegetables, but I have to make a cut. Maybe look through your vegetables and see if you can compress 2 slots into one. Find something that's interaction and card draw.
Yeah.
Find something that's both a land and your ramp spell.
Yep.
Like the Florahedron.
Florahedron. There you go.
That makes it a lot easier to check all the boxes that you're looking for and find space for cool cards that you're excited to play.
Yep. So yeah, overlap. This is the name of the game these days, and you should have so many options now for this.
All right.
Thank you. All right, next up is what I do, which is phone a friend, aka call Rachel. Hey, Rachel, help. You're the expert. Now, not everyone has a Rachel Weeks at their disposal, but that means that you can just look at your other friend groups or whatever else online, ask on Twitter. Our Discord's a great place.
Yeah.
Reddit, yeah. There's people that just get deck suggestions and stuff. What should I trim from this deck on our Discord all the time? So that's a great place to do it as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, just social media, your friend group, your friend that is a grinder that is really good at Magic, that you always trust their opinion on. Just having someone else that can look at the list and instantly go like, why is that there? Will instantly make things more clear because they are not biased.
Yeah, I really like this one. You have to remember it's a favor. I've got like you can't just hand somebody a list of 160 cards and be like, you figure it out.
Yeah.
Because that's not really it. This is more if you're down to like 105 cards or 102 cards where you're like, I really have looked at this and I don't know how I can adjust things from here. Call in an external eye. Just about every Discord that I'm on for Magic has some sort of like deck upgrading or deck tips channel where you can submit a deck list and people will look at it and help you out with it, including ours. So if you want to be a patron, we'll come in and take a look at decks together. It's a ton of fun.
Yeah, when it comes to killing your darlings, someone else that doesn't have,
Yeah, they're not their darlings.
They're not their darlings. Yeah, they just are looking at the efficiency of what's going on or whether or not something matches with what the goals of your deck are. And they can just go, no, that doesn't make any sense. Oh, you want that's an essential? Okay, well, if that's the case, then you get rid of this, right? So they'll have that to be able to see what sticks out.
Yeah, keep in mind you don't have to take their advice. A lot of people are going to look at it and be like, why are you running this over something like this? And you're like, I don't know, I like it. Like, that's a perfectly good reason to make that decision. You just have to know the reason, the answer.
Yep.
Whether it's like, oh, this one has a picture of an octopus on it, so that's the one I chose.
That's why.
Then that's good enough reason for me.
There's a hat on this cowboy. This one is also very, very easy to do, especially if you're building online, which is just cut the cards that you don't actually have in your collection.
I love this.
Yeah,
this makes it so easy.
Yeah, especially if it's like, oh, I want to build this deck. I know I can build it with these cards, but I added in all these new fantasy ones that haven't come out yet, or I just want to put it in, or I just need to trade for it. Just don't play them yet if you don't have them. And that way you don't need to think about, oh, I'm actually holding 3 slots in this deck open for these cards I'm going to get next week, maybe from my friend that maybe has them, or from the store that might be able to trade them to me or sell them to me. It's easier to go, if I don't have them yet, I'm not going to play them. And oftentimes I find that I didn't actually want them in the first place.
You don't miss them at all. There's nothing worse than like spending $10 on a card for a deck and then you putting it in a deck and the first time you play it, it's like, bad. And you're like, I spent $10 on this thing.
Coming right back out.
Don't buy the ones that you're not sure about yet, because honestly, if you've never played a deck before, you don't know what cards are essential. You don't know what is going to work. Like I built a deck that was based around combat tricks, and I put 1 and 2 mana combat tricks. And I realized in playing it, because I had Krark as one of that the 2 mana ones were so bad that I cannot cast them multiple times with Krark. So I ended up cutting like 6 combat tricks that I had bought special for the deck.
Yeah.
So
the special foil versions of them too.
Yeah, just play with it and your deck will teach you, and then you can make changes later.
Yeah, and it's a fun deck building restriction. Just be like, can I build a deck with the cards I have access to right now? Instead of, oh, I need to buy this really expensive card for this thing to work. It's like, that's 1 in 99. You may never see that card in the next 5 games you play.
Yeah.
So don't prioritize it too hard.
Or you build it and you just don't like playing the deck.
Yeah.
You're like, my deck worked and nobody liked it.
Multiple times I've built decks and played it 5 times and went, nah, I never want to play this again.
I don't want to play it.
What do I do with all of these cards? I got this special rewind. Yep.
Yeah. That one was specific. What was this rewind?
It was the Mizzix deck. Mizzix
sure.
Magus. Yeah.
Where you're just like, well, I've done the thing.
Well, I did it once.
Time to take it apart.
I didn't feel good about it. Neither anyone else. And I'll never do it again. And there goes all the money I spent on that deck.
Yeah. It'll save you some money too.
Yeah.
The next thing I wanted to talk about is protect. I called this section "Protect Your Vibes."
Protect your vibes.
Protect your vibes.
Do.
I've got cards that are just like, I don't like them in the deck. Where it's like,
Yeah.
I don't like the look of them. Like, I cut Sir Conrad from my Sidisi deck because
funny.
he was, like, too fancy.
And you have to reread it every time. Like, if it goes in the graveyard from.
No,
okay.
he was just, like, a human in, like, a suit on a horse. And Sidisi's such, like, an icky, sticky, like, elemental
that's funny.
monster deck that I was just like, he's wrong. He's wrong for the vibes. You're ruining the vibes, sir. Get out of here.
Yeah. I often just cut counter magic because I'm like, you know what? That's not what I'm trying to do. I put it in here because I knew it was good and it synergized, but that's just not my vibe.
And I don't want it.
I don't
Doesn't
want it.
make me
I don't want
happy.
to cast it. I don't want to see the expression on my opponent's face when I cast it.
Yeah.
So I just won't have it in the first place.
And then I'll lose. Cut boring cards that
Yeah.
you're just like, you know what? I run this in another deck and I don't need it in another deck. Like, it's a huge piece in like another deck's engine, so I play it all the time, and I just don't need a
Yeah, you
second
don't
deck
need
that does this as well.
Yeah, cut cards that are heavily featured in all of your other decks. I don't need to play Jessica's Will in every single deck that can play red.
I don't need to play Jessica's Will in every single deck that plays red. I don't need to
I don't
play.
need it. I don't need an Ancient Tomb in
don't.
this deck. I
It's
don't
okay.
need an Ancient
It's
Tomb in
okay.
this deck. It's actually actively bad in this deck. I don't
You
need
shouldn't put an
Ancient Tomb.
Agatha Soul Cauldron in every deck just because you like it.
Oh, man. And if I had multiple copies, I would. That card
I
is
know.
sweet.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
I keep building decks around Agatha Soul Cauldron, and then I keep being like, you don't want to buy
You
a
don't
copy
wanna-
of Agatha Soul Cauldron.
Just one's good enough. Protecting your vibes is, I think, again, going back to one of the first things I said in this episode, which a lot of people might think that these types of episodes are just about the most try-hard, perfect version of your deck. It's like the perfect version of the deck is the deck that you like to play the most.
Right.
And that can have just that really silly pony in it because you just wanted one pony card in your zoo deck or whatever it was. Or you
Yeah.
thought it was funny you're building a zoo deck, like classic zoo, but
Yeah.
you actually made it a zoo.
Yeah, you got 2 horses and 2 cats.
We bought
and
a
2
zoo.
Like, that's sweet. We
Yeah.
bought a zoo.
So your deck doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be the most fun for you. And if you find that, oh, you know what, the most fun for me is winning, then yeah, go for the optimized route. If the most fun for you is not that, then do the thing that's going to keep you playing the game for the longest. I think the burnout happens when you start playing a game that's not yours.
Yeah. If I have any goal as a creator, it's like, I would love to make you a better Magic player. I think that's great. But mostly I would like you to be a more confident Magic player and feel like you have the tools to make the decisions for yourself. And if us telling you, like, it's okay if you don't run the perfect card because you like the art on this one better.
Yeah.
And that makes you feel better as a deck builder and more confident making your own decisions. Like, then we've won today. So
The battle has been won.
it's your deck. You get to decide.
Yeah.
And finally, just don't sweat every single cut as much.
Yeah.
It's not permanent. The card will not cease to exist.
You can always put it back in.
You can always put it back. You can always buy it later. You can always replace it with a better version.
Yeah.
Decks are fluid. I think for me, I know when I need to take a deck apart when I stop messing with it.
Oh, interesting.
Because that's how I engage with my list. Like, when I stop thinking of new cards to put in,
Yeah.
then it feels like I'm bored and I don't want to actually tinker with it anymore. So getting this idea that you're like, well, if I cut this, then I'll never see it again. And they'll never call me and we'll never be friends.
There is, I will say though, everyone does have a drawer in their house, which is
Yeah.
where all the lost cards go. Yeah. And they're all in there being like, I used to be loved. I'm a dinosaur that
Oh, no.
made them fall in love with the game, and look at me, I've just been outclassed by power creep.
Toy Story, but Magic cards.
Yeah, but Magic cards. I've always wanted to do a skit where all the lost, sad giraffe chaff goes to just commiserate. And he'd be like, you were so good in that limited environment. Like, but I just don't do anything now. And then a random artifact comes along that's like, look at me, I have 17 abilities and I'm a common. And all the rares are like, no! I dominated standard once. You could trade me for anything. Tarmogoyf is just crying in the background
my
somewhere.
God.
Yeah. But yeah, decks aren't finalized after first go around. I think that's another interesting way to look at it. I think one of the first really big eye-opening moments for me was when we had a friend of the show talk about their Mael deck and how they would just have a stack of cards that they would shuffle in randomly that were all 5 power or greater or whatever.
Yeah.
Or Mana Valley, I forget what it is. And I was like, oh, wow, they're building a deck that is modular. They're building a deck that's never the same. And that's different than me thinking the final 99 cards is what it will always be forever.
Yeah.
And that there's different ways you can recontextualize how your deck works so that you don't have to sweat every cut. Like you said, it doesn't have to be like a nail in the coffin. There are always ways to revamp, revitalize, find a new home for that card, or just try it in your deck after you realize you missed it, or realize that you didn't miss it after you cut it.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing is like our format is intentionally designed to vary. It has high variance.
Yeah.
We have 100 cards. There's no repeats in there, right? Like,
yeah.
One card is not going to make or break the functionality of your deck. You want to be intentional. You want to make decisions. But if you're like, you know what, I want to keep it because of this reason, or you know what, I don't want to spend $6 or whatever it is buying a Bala Get Recovery. It's okay to play a slightly like suboptimal version, or it's okay to play one that you just like better. Not every slot has to be ideal.
No.
And that's the way the format's designed. It's forgiving and flexible.
Yeah.
And you're allowed to play Psionic Blast if you want to. Stop asking me about it. I like it.
Yeah. You can also ask yourself, what bracket is this deck supposed to be in?
Yeah, that's
and if
a
it's
great
like,
question.
this is a bracket 2 deck, then great. You don't need to stress so much about the optimized everything. If it's bracket 4 and you're going full CEDH, then yeah, obviously you can't be just dropping your Psionic Blast in there.
Yeah.
But at that point, you know what you're trying to do, so it makes it easier to make the cuts based on that.
Right.
Don't cut lands.
Don't. Unless you're intentionally like, I have decided
Yeah.
that based on data and experience, I am allowed. Don't cut lands.
I will be adding lands to my deck now after watching the new deck building template, which
All the
you should
math
all
is crazy,
watch.
right?
I know. Frank Carson saying 43.
Right? You're like, Frank,
Frank,
you're right.
You're so right. Yeah, but I will be going up. I've been like 36 land Jimmy for a bit now. I'll be trying 38, and I'll probably be happier.
You'll be happier.
And I won't miss the cards I had to cut for it. Or I'll just be playing a 102 card deck, and you won't ever know. Don't do that either.
To the listeners, how do you decide what cards that you're cutting from your deck? Do you have a technique that we didn't mention? If you're like, I make these specific piles, or like
Chaos Orb.
I like that's true. I throw my deck down a pile of stairs and I lose one of them. The last one to pick up, that's the one I cut.
I asked my cat which one they would like to eat. And that is no longer in my deck.
You have Mason pick one
Yeah,
card
oh
out
my
of a
gosh.
pile.
That would not go well. He likes to bend things. Yeah, let us know what you do, what your technique is. Maybe there's something that we did not talk about today that you find is absolutely crucial for cutting cards from your deck. Let us know in the comments below. Thank you. Thank you.
If you want to pick up any cards for your 102 card deck list, go to cardkingdom.com/command. Card Kingdom has a huge selection of singles, sealed product, everything that you need to make a cool new commander deck. We've been talking a lot about deck building lately. We've tried to release all of these together to give you the confidence to reevaluate your deck list. So it's the perfect time to build something new. A lot of new legends out all the time, and Card Kingdom has a ton of them all in one place. There's nothing more frustrating when you're building a deck that you're like, okay, I have to order 100 cards, and some are showing up on Saturday, and some are showing up on Thursday, and some may never show up. Just knowing that you're getting a huge bulk of your deck in one place and it's going to be shipped to you professionally and safely. The cards that you ordered on the website are going to be the ones that show up on your doorstep.
Yes.
That confidence is the best. So shop with Card Kingdom. They're real pros. We love them here at cardkingdom.com/command.
And protect your cards at ultrapro.com/command. They've got everything. They have the Mana 8 line that we just spent this whole last week in Chicago signing so many Mana 8 playmats.
So many.
Yeah, it was great. And
if we met you, hi, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming up. But yeah, they're amazing for signing at conventions. They also just look super classy if you're trying to rep your favorite color. They have the new Apex sleeves that are coming out with every single set now so that you have different options. The art on them looks amazing. The shuffle feels great. They have apparel. I'm wearing this cool Ether Drift t-shirt. Basically, Ultra Pro's got everything that you need at ultrapro.com/command for the game accessories brand that we here trust our own collections to at the office. Rachel's bringing out
They've
a
got
very
these
cool
things.
Yeah.
It's called the One Touch Edge, and it comes in 2 different backs. They've got like the classic Magic card back and the modern one.
It's cool. It's like a one snap thing where you can basically highlight a card, whether it's a really valuable one, you just open it up.
There we go.
And then you can put whatever you want inside. In this case, we had a knight token that was facing the wrong direction because Jimmy was upside down. So let's go ahead and fix that. And just with one snap,
Bam!
we're back in business, and we are highlighting a cool card that can now sit at your table. And you can look at, I love my little knickknacks, so this is a perfect little thing. Again, they're always coming out with great stuff. ultrapro.com/command. Check it out. Okay.
All right.
Cool.
We've got a little bit of time here. You want to talk about something outside the world of Magic?
Yes. Tell me about this show you're watching, Rachel.
I've been watching another cool post-apocalyptic show. It's called Paradise. It's Sterling K. Brown is the star. But basically, he's a security guard for, he's like head of security for the president.
Uh-huh.
And in the first episode, the president is killed.
Spoiler alert. AKA, that's what kicks off the whole show.
That's what the episode's about.
Yeah.
So this first episode, you kind of get to know him and his family and their town, and then the president dies and sort of sends everything into chaos. There's a huge twist after like the second or third episode that reveals a lot about the world that you're in.
Cool. And how we got to this post-apocalyptic scenario.
Yeah, exactly. There's hints at it, but it's really fun and it's very silly. It's, it's not the perfect script or anything.
Sure.
But it's got a great cast and it's having a ton of fun. The president is James Marsden.
Hey!
Which is crazy. He shows up and then
Cyclops?
dies immediately. Yeah. But don't worry, he shows up later too. It's fine.
Cool.
It's a ton of fun. You should check it out if you're into sort of, I think it's on Hulu.
It's on Adobo, streaming exclusively. You can get a 1-week subscription by going to bubotubo.tv.
Aioli. There's so many streaming
And you can get a joint bundle subscription to that and Disney Plus by... Yes, Hulu. Cool. It's called
Paradise. Not a great... Yeah.
But not Paradise.
It's not Paradise.
Paradise
That's a Magic
Lost?
card. Nope.
Incredible. Play it in your decks.
That card is actually really good.
It's sweet. Not modal, though, unfortunately.
Before we go, big thank you to our amazing team here at the Command Zone. Thank you to Rachel Kendrick, Karina Cruz, Sebastian Salazar, Gaurav Galati, Jamie Block, Jordan Pridgeon, Jake Boss, Eric Lem, Josh Murphy, Manson Lung, Christopher Batista, Evan Limburger, Sam Waldo, and Josh
Lee Kwai. Hoo.
Bye, everybody.
See you next time. Build some decks. Watch the deck building template. No. Yes. Bye. That's modal.
Oh, hey everyone, it's me, everyone's favorite inescapable magic mascot, Loot the Pathfinder. I don't need help finding my path through the multiverse, but when it comes to selling my sweet loot-themed loot, well, that path was paved by Shopify. As you might ancestral recall, I've talked to you about Shopify before, but the more sets I'm in, the more people demand cute, cuddleable me's, so my warehouses are flush with plush. Luckily, with Shopify's powerful tools, I'm making sales even quicker than a lightning bolt. They have the #1 checkout on the planet, making sure your shoppers' carts don't get abandoned. Like how I was abandoned in a vault for millennia. Shopify is the business behind the business, powering all sorts of sellers, even the Command Zone merch store. So if you want to boost your sales with Shopify, do it now. An opportunity like this doesn't double strike. I mean strike twice. Haha, silly little Loot.
Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/TCZ, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/TCZ to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/TCZ.